Hello students, congratulations on being done with chapter 4. Today's video, you've probably seen everything in this video already, so it's pretty much a review for you, but I'm going to go through stuff quickly. A triangle, the definition of a triangle is a polygon of 3 sides, and I don't know that we've defined polygon yet, but it is a shape that has sides and vertices. So a circle is not a polygon. And a triangle would be the smallest polygon that we have. In this figure, A, B, C are what we call the vertices of this triangle. The angles of the triangle are ABC, which would be this angle, BCA, which would be this angle, and CAB, which would be that angle. There's always 3 vertices, there's 3 angles, and of course there are 3 sides, AB, BC, and CA. When naming sides of a triangle, there is a note. A small letter, for example, A, can use to designate the side opposite angle A. So that A, if I just wanted to use a small letter A, would go right there. Okay? Now we're just going to classify our different types of triangles. Our first type of triangle is an equilateral triangle. And if you could break it down, it has the word equa and lateral, which means sides, and that's a triangle with 3 congruent sides. You know that the sides are congruent if you have 3 congruent sides, if you have 3 markings on those. The second type of triangle we have is an isosceles triangle. And what you need to be careful here is that it's a triangle with at least 2 equal sides. Here's the thing. An equilateral triangle is always going to be isosceles. An isosceles triangle does not have to be equilateral if just 2 of the sides are congruent. And what is important with isosceles is that we have labels. If it is the congruent pieces, that's what we call the legs. And the piece that is not congruent is what we call the base. A scalene triangle is a triangle with no equal sides. So it just means that each side length is different. And here's something I want to bring up with triangles. That's a really important piece. Sides and angles correlate. So if all the sides of this triangle are different, then all the angles must be different. So if we go back to equilateral real quick, if all these sides are congruent, then each of these angles, A, B, and C, are also congruent. So if I said this triangle is equilateral, it's also going to be that it has all equal angles. Isosceles triangle, because 2 of the legs are congruent, then 2 of the angles are going to be congruent. So C and B are going to be congruent all the time in an isosceles triangle. And then lastly, our last triangle that's by sides is scalene. Our next triangles are classified by their angles. And the first one we have is a right triangle. And a right triangle is a triangle containing 1 right angle. And just like isosceles, it has specific names. The sides that make up the 90 degrees is what we call the legs. And the side that is across from 90, which is the longest side of the triangle, is what we call the hypotenuse. Do you think a right triangle could have 2 90-degree angles? It cannot, because we're going to learn that the sum of a triangle is only 180 degrees. So if you have 2 angles that are 90, the sum's already 180, which means it's too much. So a right triangle can only ever have 1 right angle. Our next triangle, which is named by its angle, is an obtuse triangle. An obtuse triangle contains 1 obtuse angle. Remember, it can only have one obtuse angle because as soon as it's over 90 degrees, we can't have two angles that are obtuse. Also keep in mind, if it's obtuse and this is the largest angle here, the side opposite it is always going to be the longest side. And not that we need to know that yet, but just something to consider, that sides and angles are going to correlate in triangles. An acute triangle is a triangle that contains three acute angles, so it has to have all acute angles. If they have to sum up to 180, then we can have 80, 50, which is 130, and then 30. So that could be three angles, 80, 50, and 30. And our last triangle is an equiangular. It's equiangular, not equal angular. And this is just like equilateral. It's equa in angles. And this means that it has all three angles equal. And if our sum has to be 180 degrees, then every one of these angles has to be 180 divided by 3, which is 60. Keep in mind, if all the angles are the same, then all the sides are same. So every triangle that is equiangular is also equilateral. So let's see if we could put together, you can't do this, but hopefully you can get it right. If it has three congruent angles, that's three angles that are the same, it has to be equiangular. If it has three acute angles, that's going to be an acute triangle. If it has at least two congruent sides, that's the definition of isosceles. If it has three congruent sides, it's equilateral. If it has at least one obtuse angle, and remember it can only ever have one, it's obtuse, and no congruent sides is scalene. And the only one not on here is a right triangle, in which it would have one right angle. Never can it have more. All right, hopefully that was somewhat of a review. One thing to keep in mind is that angles and sides correlate.